Our movie begins in 1995 in New Jersey with Chris and Jimmy, who are best friends and spend most of their time together because they have a lot in common. Chris is the smoking hottie in school, and everyone bullies him, unlike Jimmy, who is the prettiest girl in school, and all the guys want to be with her. Over time, Chris is conscious of his love for Jamie and is unable to confess his love to her. On the night of high school graduation, Chris decides to write to Jamie in her high school book about his love for her. He writes a lot of words, and because he is unable to say them himself, he decides to let her read them herself. On graduation night, the students celebrate at Jamie's house, which is the biggest house in town, and Jamie gets tired and goes out with Chris to her room, and they laugh and joke with each other. And then Chris tells Jamie that he wants to tell her something important, and suddenly Tom enters, who is Jamie's ex-boyfriend. But he's a very frivolous young man, and Jamie can't stand him and develops outside her room. And then Chris tells Jamie that he wrote something for her in her high school book and wants her to read it. Suddenly, Dusty enters, who also likes Jamie, and tells her that he wrote her a song and sings to her while playing the guitar, and his playing is very bad, and he doesn't know how to sing. So Chris throws him out of the room. Then Chris gives him the book. Jimmy knocks on the door again. Chris gets angry and upset with the person who knocks and tells him that he is busy. Jim tries to calm him down, but before he can speak, she tells him that she bought him something and brings him a t-shirt that says, "As a Shab, Friends." Chris gets really angry and feels that she really doesn't see him as anything but a friend, but he decides to confess. Whatever happens, Jim opens the book and reads strange words. Chris is not the one who wrote them. He writes that it is a book that was written and that instead of his book, he replaces it with Chris's book without him noticing. Chris knows what happened and quickly leaves the room. Bella is in Tim reading. He writes it in front of everyone at the party, and Chris gets really excited and makes all the students laugh at what he wrote, and he believes that he is confessing his love to Jimmy, and Chris gets really mad and goes out of the house, and Carla and Derek come, and they are his close friends, and they try to make him feel better, but he insists on going, and Jim comes and asks him if these are really his feelings towards her. So she tells him that. He really loves her, so she tells him that. These are the sweetest words that have ever been written to her in her life. And they kiss him on the cheek and say that she also loves him like a brother. And all the students go out and bully him. And they tell him that Jimmy Q told him that she loves him like a brother. So Chris gets very angry and tells them that he will be the best and most successful of them all. He rides his bike and walks. 10 years pass, and Chris is working in an international production company. He becomes very rich and successful in his work. He loses weight, and his body becomes very fit. A few days before Christmas, the manager asks him to do a deal with a famous singer named Samantha who has loved Chris for a long time, which makes Chris very angry because he can't stand her. This is because the only time he went out with her, he almost burned to death. This is because she is a crazy and careless person who doesn't pay attention to anything. However, the manager threatens that if he doesn't do this deal with her, he will find someone else and continue. They say that it is a very important deal because she is considered one of the most famous singers in America. Although her voice is very bad, people love her style and her appearance. So Chris reluctantly agrees and goes to Sandman so that they can travel together to the place where she will sing her new song. Samantha is happy when she sees him, and she considers herself engaged to Chris because of the only date they went out on, and Chris cannot refuse because the deal must be done with him, and they get on the plane, and Samantha keeps singing her new song to Chris 100 times. Chris gets really upset and can't stand himself. Then Simmons gets up to heat up food in the plane's microwave. She puts a paper plate in it and drains the microwave until it burns. The plane catches fire, and the eggs are quickly brought down. The weather gets really hot. Simmons doesn't want to admit her mistake and tells them that she doesn't care about anything and that she's famous and has a lot of work in the plane. Chris about the place they are in, and he knows that it is in New Jersey, which is his hometown, and Chris calls a lot because he has not been home for years, so he decides to visit his family and spend the night with them until the time of the next plane, and Simmons is happy that she will meet his family, and Chris knocks on the door of the house, and his mother opens the door and screams as soon as she sees him, and then he sees his brother Mikey, who runs quickly towards him, but it turns out that he is running towards Samantha, who he admires very much, and it appears that Chris' relationship with his brother is very bad and they fight all the time, but at the same time they love each other very much. Chris enters his room, which he hasn't entered for 10 years, and Bella has a picture with Jamie hanging everywhere. So he takes them all and puts them in his memory box. Then he goes down to sit with his mother, and Samantha stays sitting next to him the whole time. All the time, she makes strange movements and makes his mother believe that they are in a relationship. Mikey prefers to sit with Samantha, and he cannot believe that she is at their house. Chris is very busy, and they go to a nearby bar, and Samantha goes with him everywhere and does not want to leave him. Chris enters the bar that he has not entered for 10 years, and suddenly he sees Derek. And Carla is in front of him, and they take pictures, and they are amazed by his new look, and Chris realizes that they both became dentists and that they got married and had children, and Carla signals to Jimmy, who appears to work in the bar, and the first thing she sees is Chris in his new look. She believes him and quickly gets tired, but Chris sees her and greets her, and they hug each other. Jamie cannot believe that he has lost weight and keeps thinking that he has gained weight and that she did not know how to hug him. Chris thanks her because she thinks that he was fat, and they laugh together. Then she asks Jamie about the time he will spend with them. So he tells her that he will stay just one day. Jimmy keeps calling her, but she keeps asking him to call her every now and then. Chris leaves the bar because of Simons, who keeps pestering him, but he comes back to Jimmy and tells her that the plane might be delayed and that he might stay an extra day. They have lunch together the next day, and Chris calls her because he knows that lunch is for friends, but dinner is for those in a relationship. He knows that he will remain in the friend zone as before, but Derek and Carla encourage him to try again. The next day, Chris asks Mikey to take Samantha anywhere. And because he wants to go out with Jimmy, Mikey agrees without hesitation because of his passion for sex. Then Chris rents a Porsche and passes by Jimmy at her house. He becomes her father's apple, who thinks of fattening him and treats him rudely. Jimmy finally leaves, and they sit together in the same restaurant they used to sit in 10 years ago. Years, and the waitress remembers and is very welcoming and brings them their order that they used to ask for 10 years ago, and it appears that Chris loved food very much and ate a lot of sweets, so Chris gets angry with the waitress who asked him what he wanted to eat and wants to treat him the same way she did 10 years ago. So Jimmy loves to calm him down and apologizes to the waiter for his mistake, and they continue talking. They talk about their memories and their lives over the past few years. Chris knows that Jamie intends to work as a teacher and that her job in henna is temporary. As for Chris, he prefers to talk about himself and his successes. Jamie feels that Chris has completely changed from who he was before, and he gets a call from Mikey, who wants to travel with Samantha to Paris, but Chris completely refuses. Mikey holds a taser, and Samantha stands in front of him. Suddenly, Mike accidentally shoots Samantha with the gun, who gets electrocuted and falls from the mall wall. Mike ends the call, and Chris returns to Jimmy. After a while, they decide. They go, and he arrives at Chris's house, and because of his nervousness, he says stupid things in front of Jimmy, and he looks very silly, and he comes to kiss her, but he discovers that she wants to hug him, but the house is very hot, and he leaves, and Chris returns home and sees Samantha, and her face is ruined because of the accident that happened, and he fights with Mikey, and suddenly the manager calls him, so Chris is in his hand. He says that everything is fine, and at night Chris decides to call Mimi and ask her for another appointment, and they decide to go to ice skating, which is the game that Chris was very bad at, but during the past years he was training to play hockey and become a professional skater, so he wanted to show off his skills in front of Jimmy. Chris was looking for his skates and wrote that his mother sold them, so he decided to rent another one, but it was very old and looked bad. Chris went with Jim to skate and kept falling more than once, and he looked like he is very bad, but he tries to convince himself that he is a hero and that the shoe is the reason. Then he decides to try to show off his moves in front of Jamie and wants to dance with her, but he bumps into her and Jamie falls to the ground. Suddenly, her students see her and ask her to play a match with them. Chris enters the match with them, but he does not know how to play at all. He falls more than once and makes me lose all the points, and the kids keep bullying him like they used to do in the past, so Jamie loves to defend him. Chris gets very angry, and they keep playing with all his strength, hitting the kids and blocking the ball in the goal, but it comes in the way and comes back to him again, breaking his teeth. He falls to the ground, and everyone laughs at him. The ambulance arrives, and Chris is bleeding. As soon as Jim sees him, she gets dizzy. Before she falls, a handsome young man from the ambulance team runs after her. It turns out that he is Dusty, who had a crush on Jim in high school. Chris gets very tired and is unable to speak because of his teeth. Dusty keeps flirting with Jimmy in front of him. Chris tries to get up from his seat, but he can't, and the pizza falls on the ice, and he falls again, and everyone laughs at him. And then they get in the ambulance, and Dusty takes Jimmy's number. And it turns out that she also likes him, and Chris goes to the hospital, and he meets his friends Derek and Carla, and tells them what happened, and Dick tells him that it's clear that he's back again. He returns to the friendship zone, and if a competitor appears to him, he tells him not to, and that he is no longer the Chris of the past, so he prefers that Jamie wants him, and he writes that she has been attracted to good young men like him for a long time. So he encourages Chris, and they read that he is sensitive and good like the past. He asks her to go watch a romantic movie together in the cinema. At night, Jimmy comes and greets his father, Chris. Suddenly, Dusty appears and Jimmy invites him to spend time with them. Dusty insists on Chris's father letting her come with them as well. She agrees and accepts all of Chris's plans. He does not know how to sit alone with Jimmy, and they go with some cinema, and the movie is very sad, and Chris's mom, Jimmy, and Christy are crying. So Chris is wondering why they are crying, and the movie ends, and they go back home. On the way, Chris's dad invites Dusty to spend some time with him at home, but Dusty tells them that he volunteered at the hospital instead of his friend, who is sick and wants to spend Christmas with his family. Bayer is impressed by his father Chris and Jimmy with Dusty's kindness and sacrifices, and they admire him very much. Jimmy goes with Chris to the house, and they all sit together and watch their memories when they were young, and they are very happy and laugh from their hearts. Then Chris takes Jimmy home, and they are happy. Chris returns home and takes out his box of memories, in which he has written a paper confessing his love to Jamie, and it contains 100 reasons why he loves her. They read it and confessed to her for the second time. The next day, he asks Mikey to spend time with Simmons as usual and tells him to go Jamie. He thinks that Simmons is asleep, but she appears. She is awake and hears everything. At Jimmy's house, he sees Chris Dusty sitting with Jimmy's family and the neighbors, singing to them and playing the guitar for them. His level improves, and everyone loves him. Suddenly, he sings a song for Jimmy in front of all the people. Chris gets really excited and throws away the paper he has and sits away from the people. He is sad and comes. Dirk tells him that it is not reasonable that he will give in easily in front of Dusty, and that he is involved with actors and models, and that Dust is not the one who will stop him at home. Chris is encouraged and decides to talk to Jamie himself, and goes out to her outside the house, and suddenly he finds a car coming from afar. At crazy speed, he knows that it is Samantha who knows his location. Samantha enters the house in the car and breaks everything in front of her and tears all the decorations and goes down and quarrels with Jimmy and curses, and Chris is unable to stop her because he is afraid of losing the deal. Then Samantha walks, and without noticing, she tangles her car with the power cord and pulls it with her. And while she was walking, an electrical short circuit occurred that set all the decorations in the garden on fire. Chris returns home depressed and sad. He sits in his room, and suddenly there is a knock on the door. He is startled that his mother wants to comfort him, so she goes out to give him some time alone, but the door keeps knocking. Chris apologizes to her for what happened and tells her that he covered all the expenses, so she stays. She tells him that she is not a beggar and that she wants to talk to him about his paper, and she finds that the dead man's paper is the reason for his love for her, and they sit and talk to each other, and he spends time nice. And Chris doesn't want to pressure Jamie, so he tells her that he will take her home. But Jamie tells him that she will stay with him and his baby together. The next day, Chris goes to his friends at the hospital and is very upset with himself. He tells them that he wanted to confess his love to her and kiss her, but he was afraid that they can't continue their relationship, especially since each one of them has his life in a different place. At the same time, Jamie keeps complaining to her friend that she slept next to him and that he didn't tell her anything. At the hospital, Chris leaves his friend's clinic and suddenly sees Dusty flirting with a nurse in front of him. It becomes clear that they are in a relationship, so Chris holds her hand and asks about his feelings. Jimmy's side is in Dusty's house, and they say that to him, she is the girl who rejected him in high school and that he wants revenge on her, and he takes advantage of the fact that he is no longer rejected and enters into many relationships. And this means that he was pretending to Jim that he is still the nice, sensitive young man who cares about people and cries in movies, and this is so that she agrees to be engaged to him and to make up for the feeling of rejection that he has felt for 10 years. He stoned Chris and told him that he would not let him do this to his girlfriend. Chris returns home and changes his clothes at the time that Dusty goes to the party at the church that Jamie will be at. Chris goes after him and sees Jamie and calls her. But Dusty tells her that he will sing her a song and she has to sit down. But Chris insists and tells her that he will tell her something important, and she sells it to her with all the shame. Dusty confronts Jimmy and tells him that he said the same thing to her about him. So Chris tries to convince her of what he saw, but she does not believe him and leaves and walks away, and his heart breaks. Chris returns home for the second time, takes his bag of clothes, and leaves without saying goodbye to anyone. On the way, he drinks a lot and stops at a bus stop. Then, he gets on a bus and suddenly sees the bar where Jimmy works. Then he gets off the bus again, very drunk, and goes in to apologize to her. And it turns out that Dusty is with her. So Chris tries to convince her that Dusty is playing with her. So Dusty makes provocative moves because he knows that Jamie will not believe him. And suddenly Jamie tells Chris that she and Dusty are just friends and there is nothing between them. So he can laugh at her as he says in their house. Dusty tells her that he wants them to be more than just friends. But Jamie tells him that she loves him like a brother. Dusty gets angry and shows his true face and tells her that he wrote her a song and worked hard to be able to talk to her. But she doesn't deserve this. He walks away and leaves Jamie suffocating with Chris. She tells him that it's not a toy in their hands for them to do this to her, but Chris gets angry and tells her realistic things, that she's grown up and no one will look at her, and he tells her that he's going back to Los Angeles. So she attacks him and shows that she doesn't care and leaves. And she walks and Chris gets on his plane and arrives home, and Bella is waiting for him and apologizing to him for what happened, and she keeps playing her song and doing her strange movements as if she is really his lover. Chris gets angry and tells her to stop interfering in his life more than this, and that no one is allowed to love anyone, but she doesn't care and tells him she forgives him. So he tells her that he only wants one girl to forgive him, and that is Jamie. They go to New Jersey, and he goes with Jamie and apologizes to her for everything he said, and he tells her about his love. He kisses her for the first time in 20 years, and Jamie is happy, as she was waiting for him to take a step, and she falls in love with him, and they go to New Jersey. The two of them complete their lives together forever.